Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with you on this 1st of May. Hard to believe we're already here, but onward we must go into spring. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. For many of you along the rivers now, we are watching actively the changing of the river conditions there. We call that River Watch, of course, when the National Weather Service joins with the emergency operations of the state of Alaska and your local officials there to keep our villages safe. And make sure you're staying up to date on the local information there. We'll have a look at the latest advisory here in just a minute, coming up for AKwx. 1-800-472-0391 is the best way to get your weather information over the phone. Online, it's weather.gov/Alaska, and click on the map will take you to that weather information, again, including things around AKwx there. If you can't find what you want, let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov is an easy way to email me, whether you're in the bush or on the broadband system here in Anchorage or checking in on the satellite. It's pretty easy. Just send me a text message that way, and I'll get right back to you as soon as I possibly can. Let's take a look at the situation now out in AKwx. This is really just a small area right along the Kuskokwim River that we're talking about, so not this whole area flooded or anything like that, but just to draw your attention to the right spot. Flood advisory there is posted for AKwx until 11:15 Wednesday morning. As we look at the breakup map, you can see that there is some unknown areas there in the upper Kuskokwim, but as you get downriver just a little bit more, there's already some mostly open and maybe even some completely open areas, but the area in question is right about here, and we are thinking that there's an ice jam in the region, and the water has been coming up around the AKwx area over one of the roads near the airport, and we certainly do appreciate the reports that we've had already. So we're watching this actively. We have National Weather Service hydrologists that have been monitoring the situation along with your community officials. And certainly do appreciate the information and the pictures. That really does help. So let's keep everybody informed. Keep sharing that information on your Facebook groups as you have. And we'll continue to let you know what's happening downriver as soon as we get that information there. But the latest is a flood advisory has been posted because there is flooding occurring. Most of that is going to be fairly minor, we think, in the AKwx area. But the advisory will go until about 11:15 Wednesday morning until we get some more information to update that. You can always check for the latest information anytime from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center at weather.gov/APRFC, and you can zoom into this map here and just monitor the Kuskokwim River if that's what you want, or if you'd like to watch the areas up around the Tanana, you can certainly do that. And of course, we know that as of earlier this afternoon, the Nenana ice tripod did go out. The Tanana River ice was moving there, enough so downstream that the tripod tipped, and ice is on the move. So here we go, onward into spring. Let's take a look at the visible satellite picture here, and you can see the overall weather pattern is low pressure working from west to east across the western part of the chain into the Gulf, and each one of these waves is sweeping a tremendous amount of cloud cover across south central and into southeast. Plenty of rain there, a little bit of blue sky trying to poke its way back into south central and out across the west, a very unsettled pattern there. We've also got a tremendous amount of cold in the interior for more snow. It has been snowing in Fairbanks, it has been snowing out across Nome and southwest and into the northern interior. It's not looking so much like May 1st. At least not maybe in the way you'd like to see it. So we are still dealing with winter. We are still dealing with a very progressive and active weather pattern, and this will probably continue at least through the end of this week and into early next week before we start to see a reasonable and detectable change in the weather pattern that might bring us into a slightly warmer, perhaps slightly drier weather pattern with less snow and more seasonable temperatures that you would generally expect for this time of the year. So that's where we are. Here's a look at the picture with the surface features drawn on top. Low pressure sitting across the northern Gulf at 1,009 millibars. A warm front was moving into southeast, spreading rainfall across a large part of the panhandle this afternoon. You can still see some rain and snow out across southwest, especially along the Alaska Range down toward King Salmon. As you get up into the Kuskokwim Valley, you're seeing some light snow in those regions out around Unalakleet, north toward Nome, Wales and Tin City, looking at some light snow, as well as Kotzebue and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, just south of a front there. The front was moving its way southward into the Brooks Range and will continue just kind of lingering out here across the North Slope for the next couple days. Out across the west, low pressure was moving across the chain. That will continue to be the pattern there from west to east. Again, just one wave right after the next. We'll get a little bit of a break in the clouds across the Gulf. More rain spreads across southeast tonight. Snow showers across the interior and mainly along the Alaska Range. Areas of fog across southwest. Watch for some light snow across the northern and central interior all the way through the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound. The North Slope still looking at some light snow along the coast, and low pressure moving through the Pribilofs and the central and southern Bering Sea will drag a front across the Aleutians. That'll keep rain showers moving eastward into Bristol Bay for your Wednesday. And every morning, it looks like we're just going to have a smackdown of visibility. So your flying weather, if you are not IFR rated, you're going to have a lot of trouble on the west coast the next couple days. And in some places around the Prince William Sound region and southeast, it's going to be a little hard to move around, at least in the morning. By the afternoon, though, good news, a lot of this does seem to improve because we're getting some of that daytime solar heating here that helps to lift the deck a little bit there and improve visibility. So morning flying is going to be a little tough, at least for a while, the next couple mornings. Low pressure sitting across the Brooks Range will keep snow showers focused in Kotzebue Sound all the way down to the Yukon Valley. Now, some of the lower terrain is still going to be warm enough for some rainfall, and we'll hopefully expect that that gets into places like Fairbanks, where you're still dealing with fresh snow, not just snow, but fresh snow as we're getting up on our studded snow tire deadline, of course. Low pressure around the Pribilofs, 1,002 millibars there. A front moving into southwest, Bristol Bay, pulling in some westerly flow with that. Some rain showers expected there. Back behind it, still cold enough for snow out across the western Bering. So a pretty active pattern as we go. Here's Thursday. That low pressure system drops southward, south of the Alaska Peninsula. Lows down to 986. So we're watching this carefully because you'll notice the pressure gradient's tightening up here, and that's going to spread more of that wet weather northward, but we're going to have to keep an eye on this position to see if we get more wind around south central as that comes through into Thursday night and Friday for the Anchorage area and the road system, Parks Highway, and also into Prince William Sound down toward Homer. So the position of this and the strength of this is being watched very carefully around the Anchorage area for sure. Now you can see some ridging happening over southeast. A broad area of wet weather will continue for a large part of the Panhandle. And that warmer, wetter flow extends all the way up into the central and western parts of the Yukon. Behind that, though, it's the wraparound that's drawing in a wide open area of cold air across the Bering Sea. You can see some drier air punching through the Bering Strait. But we do get into snow all the way across the chain, and that could be Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky, all the way to the west, Adak and Atka, looking at some new snow there as we get into Thursday and probably Friday as well for parts of the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit of light snow up around parts of Arctic Village and just south there, and you can still see a little bit of mixed precipitation around the upper Kobuk, Noatak valleys, maybe as far east as Ambler. So a lot going on. It's still a pretty active pattern, and this is just Thursday. It's not even Friday. Here's a look at temperatures for Wednesday morning. Lower 40s for southeast, fairly mild there. At or just below freezing for parts of south central. Homer about 35, Kodiak 36. The middle Tanana Valley, upper 20s for you. And teens for many across the North Slope there. Barrow looking at 11 and 12 around Kaktovik. 24 around Kotzebue. 18 for Nome. Southwest, you're looking at upper 20s and low 30s. Most of the chain just above freezing. St. Paul 35, a high of 39 for your Wednesday afternoon. South Central should see temperatures back in the mid-40s by day's end. Southeast, lower to mid-50s for many. The North Slope in the teens and 20s. Wainwright expecting 22. Around 20 degrees for Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse. Fairbanks and North Pole closer to 40 degrees with Ambler at 31. Overnight lows for Thursday morning. Teens and 20s in the north. Some areas in the Beaufort Seacoast closer to 8 degrees. 20 in Nome, 21 for Shishmaref. Nunivak Island, you're about 20. Gamble, 25 degrees. Bristol Bay temperatures back in the mid-30s. Kodiak, 37. Southeast, upper 30s and lower 40s around Ketchikan and Net all the way out towards Sitka. Looks like Prince William Sound temperatures, Cordova, Valdez, Whittier. You should see lows back just above freezing tomorrow, and mid to upper 30s for many around Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and all the way out towards Sandpoint. High temperatures on Thursday now. Back in the mid-40s for the middle Tanana Valley, continuing to rot away some of the ice there. Mid to upper 40s for many in south and west. Kodiak 46, south central closer to 50 degrees in some parts, closer to 50 for southern southeast as well.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your aviation weather now. Widespread IFR conditions are expected across the central and southern parts of the Panhandle tomorrow morning, obviously across the Bering Sea, widely covered there all the way from tip to tail along the Aleutians, and a large part of the northern and western interior and the North Slope with hit and miss IFR across some parts of the Alaska Range, the Wrangell-St. Elias Range, and into the northern and eastern passes as well. By the time we get into the afternoon, you will see some improvement. Looking for widespread MVFR now across a large part of southeast, especially northern southeast. You will see some breaks across the central and southern parts of the inside passages, but the outer coast should be fairly covered there. IFR conditions expected across southwestern Alaska into Bristol Bay and parts of the Alaska Peninsula and along the central and eastern parts of the Brooks Range with MVFR just about everywhere else tomorrow afternoon. IFR starts your Thursday morning. You can see it stretching from St. Matthew Island toward Nunivak Island into Bristol Bay, around Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island in the northern and western Alaska Range, hit and miss just outside of Juneau and north, and MVFR conditions scattered across southeast with IFR fairly widespread across the northern terrain. By the afternoon on Thursday, IFR conditions are lingering across the northern Gulf Coast out over the central Gulf itself with MVFR in southeast. IFR conditions just east of Lake Iliamna northward and all the way out toward Cape Newenham, with MVFR conditions widespread across the Bering, the North Slope, the West Coast, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and just about every sound there is in the west, and some VFR conditions will start to work their way in across the central and eastern interior. Here's your pass conditions in detail for tomorrow. Then Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see instrument flight rule pretty much all day long as you go there. With widespread IFR across the Alaska Range, we will see some marginal improvement for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass by your Wednesday afternoon. Rainy Pass also expected to start at IFR, but with some gradual improvement throughout the day. Windy Pass also expected to see some improvement. Isabel Pass is going to have an IFR start for your Wednesday. Look for some improvement in the afternoon there. Mentasta Pass probably holding at MVFR through most of your Wednesday. Tanita Pass also expected to be marginal for most of your midweek. Portage starts out at VFR, and then as the day goes on, MVFR from the east is going to start to push through. We may see that on the western side of the pass as well, so keep that in mind if you're traveling through that region. And Chilkoot and White Pass obviously has started IFR. Looking at MVFR conditions by the afternoon, and again some breaks there across some parts of the central and southern southeast panhandle. Freezing levels show there's plenty of warm air out there. It's just not lifting northward into the last frontier. So for right now, here's the surface freezing line across the northern and eastern Gulf. Just north of Juneau is where that's lying right now, and then from Nunivak Island and splitting the difference with St. Matthew. South of that, levels rise as high as 2,000 to 4,000 feet across the central and eastern chain in the Alaska Peninsula, and parts of southeast seeing 2,000 foot levels around Juneau to about 8,000, even 10,000 feet as you get down toward the Haida Gwaii region and Dixon Entrance. So there is plenty of warm air there. It's just not over most of us. The icing potential then is still lingering anywhere from 5,000 to about 9,000 feet across the Bering Sea into the western Gulf and Kodiak Island, southwestern Alaska especially, looking at those levels there, reaching isolated moderate in the morning. And for the north, those levels could be as high as about 3,000 feet and higher, maybe 5,000 feet as you get down towards southeastern Alaska. Fairly wide coverage up north and again across southwest. The jet stream is showing the main quarter of fast-moving air is located right over the chain, about 120 to 150 knots over the northern Gulf Coast, and then slowing down as it moves over British Columbia. We've got another wave of low pressure here across the southern Gulf, and that is steering in winds from the south, making their way right up over Vancouver Island, but missing a lot of southeastern Alaska with some of that warmer air and certainly wetter air as well with high pressure down across the west coast of California. When we look at 9,000 feet, you'll notice there's winds that are very slow across the north and western part of Alaska. The main flow is out here across the chain and over the Gulf from a west to southwesterly trajectory, and several circulations sit out across the west, but they're not really steering in very fast air at 3,000 feet. A very similar story. Very light winds across the west. Stronger winds start to shape up here around the central and eastern chain from Adak all the way out toward Pilot Point and Bristol Bay. South and westerlies across the Gulf. Winds fairly light across southeast as well, only 10 to 15 knots there, and also across the central and eastern interior. So good news if you're looking for light winds to fly through there. The turbulence potential, there are a few bumpy spots there. One of those around Gustavus and the Cross Sound region below about 6,000 feet. Also across the west coast, a little bit of chop and some moderate all the way for the central and eastern Aleutians below about 4,000 feet for Wednesday. I'll be back with a look at your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, and new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail.
Right.
And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt.
Sure.
So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
This sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going
erupting.
off.
Yep.
Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically, the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the North Slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. it's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. And I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, you know, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska. Time now for a look at today's sea ice edge. It's for the 1st of May, and you can see there is plenty of open water now north of St. Lawrence Island into the Bering Strait, just north of a little Dehne Island as well. Many areas there at or below that 80% concentration threshold that turns our colors blue on the map, and you can also see many areas here in white still above that ice concentration level of 80%. East of Barrow, it's still ice packed in there. And into the upper ends of Kotzebue Sound. Still a little bit of high concentration ice in the upper end of Norton Sound along the northern Yukon Delta, and just a little bit up toward Newtok perhaps, but a lot of areas there are seeing that open water develop very quickly once again. Anytime you want to check this out, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for your Alaska Sea Ice team. Here's a look at Wednesday's forecast in the southeast. The strongest winds will be in Lynn Canal. As always, it seems like southerlies 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. South and easterly winds coming up the inside 10 to 15 knots. The outer coast south of Sitka, really light winds there. Seas up around 7 feet though, so still looking at some small crafts in a few areas. Westerlies coming in across the northern Gulf 20 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. As you get into the outer coast on Thursday, south and easterly flow about 15 to 25 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas there. The highest seas, strongest winds developing just outside of Prince William Sound. Small seas, light winds inside of the central and southern part of the Panhandle, but our Lynn Canal friends still looking at southerlies at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. In south central, winds will be fairly light. Small seas inside of Prince William Sound for Wednesday. Westerlies coming across the northern Gulf, 6 to 8 foot seas there, and across Cook Inlet, westerlies prevail. 10 to 20 knot winds with 4 to 5 foot seas in most areas. We'll see smaller seas up north. That becomes a 5-foot sea on Thursday with the northeast wind developing, and you'll see the winds strengthening outside of Homer and Kachemak Bay. 20 to 30 knots there with south and easterly flow coming into the northern and western Gulf. 30 knots with a 9-foot sea outside of Montague Island, and easterlies inside of Prince William Sound. 25 knots with a 5-foot sea expected. You can see the effects of low pressure here just east and south of the Pribilofs. A south and easterly flow over most of the Alaska Peninsula will continue at 20 to 25 knots. Kodiak Island, lightly somewhat smaller seas and winds just east of the island inside of Shelikof Strait. Southerlies there, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. As we get into Thursday, notice those winds coming from the south and west, more of a southeasterly fetch developing across Shelikof Strait, 25 knots with a 6-foot sea, 8-foot seas to the east, 9-foot seas south of the Alaska Peninsula, and 5 to 8-foot seas expected across the Alaska Peninsula's Bering Sea coast there with that 20 to 25 knot wind. Here's Wednesday across the chain, 20 to 30 knot winds across the central and eastern zones there with an east and southwesterly flow, 10 knots across the Pacific coast, 6 to 7 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, 10-foot seas, I should say, and northwesterlies across the western chain, 15 knots with a 7 to 8 foot sea. As we get into Thursday, the higher seas are building to the north. Here's the Pribilofs for reference, and we've got that west and southwesterly flow here at 20 to 30 knots, 20 to 25 knots across the Pacific coast. Still looking at 7 to 9 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast side, or the Pacific side, I should say, 8 to 10 foot seas across the Pacific, and 8 foot seas out west of Adak all the way to Kiska and Shemya. Now, for the west coast, look at the light north winds just south of St. Lawrence Island and into Norton Sound. This is open water now. 2 to 4 foot seas expected there. An east and northwesterly flow coming in, wrapping around low pressure near the Pribilofs. 15 knots around the St. Paul and St. George islands, or villages there, and the Pribilof Islands. 5 foot seas expected, up to 12 foot seas there as we get into Thursday. Northerlies at 30 knots, and north winds develop across most of the west coast. 15 to 25 knots expected there for your Thursday afternoon, and northeasterlies inside of Norton Sound, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea. Across the north, still over the ice, easterlies 10 to 15 knots across the Chukchi coast, 10 to 15 knots in sea ice free areas. That's 2 to 3 foot seas expected, 4 foot seas north of St. Lawrence Island, coming up to 20 knot winds as we get into Thursday in that region up through the Bering Strait, 4 foot seas. Small seas developing around the Chukchi coast, about 5 to 10 foot seas, 5 to 10 knot winds expected for the Chukchi. And over the Beaufort, easterlies still over the ice around 10 knots, so fairly light winds there. Good news there as the front is just dropping southward ever so slowly across the Brooks Range. And let's take a look at the map for tonight. A front hovers very close to the Brooks Range. South of that, snow will continue to fall into the Noatak and Kobuk valleys and the middle Yukon Valley. South of that, it's warm enough for the Cusco ice to start rotting and moving around, and in some cases it's already jammed up. So a flood advisory continues for the Aniak area until 11:15 on Wednesday morning. Riverwatch teams from the National Weather Service and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, as well as the state of Alaska, are on site assessing that now, so stay tuned.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.